Who's this?
Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The smell of burnt toast filled our kitchen that Tuesday evening, and I watched Julian scrape black crumbs into the trash with his usual methodical precision. Everything about my husband was methodical. The way he folded his napkins, the way he arranged his coffee mug handle at exactly 90 degrees, the way he pretended not to notice when I came home late 3 nights running. "You're burning dinner again," I said, leaning against the granite countertop we'd picked out together 5 years ago when we still believed in forever. "Maybe if you weren't always buried in those work files, you'd pay attention to what's actually happening in this house." Julian didn't look up from the toaster. At 34, he still had that boyish face that had attracted me in college, but now it just looked weak. Passive, like he'd rather disappear into his spreadsheets than deal with real life. "The Henderson project needs to be finished by Friday," he said quietly, the same tone he used for everything: grocery lists, anniversary plans, the slow death of our marriage. "I'm sorry about the toast." I rolled my eyes, though he wasn't looking to see it. "You're always sorry about something. The late nights, the weekend work calls, the way you zone out when I'm talking." I moved closer, letting my voice drop to that sweet, dangerous register I'd perfected over the years. "You know, Julian, you should be grateful I'm as loyal as I am. Most wives wouldn't put up with a husband who's married to his job." He paused, butter knife halfway to the bread, and for a second I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. But then he just nodded, that same agreeable nod he'd been giving me for months. "I know you're loyal, Lexi. I've always known that." The way he said it made something twist in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling away. Julian was harmless. Julian was predictable. Julian was the kind of man who apologized for burnt toast while his wife was texting another man under his nose. My phone buzzed against the counter, a message from Cassidy about tomorrow's lunch plans. I snatched it up quickly, but not before Julian's eyes flicked toward the sound. For just a moment, his expression sharpened, like he was calculating something behind that mild exterior. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just work stuff." I slipped the phone into my back pocket, where the warmth of it felt like a secret against my skin. "Cassidy wants to grab lunch tomorrow. Girl talk, you know how it is." "Right, girl talk." Julian finished buttering his toast with the same careful strokes. "Will you be late again?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to voice. I could have reassured him, could have promised to be home by 6 with takeout from his favorite Thai place. Instead, I let the silence stretch until it felt like a challenge. "I might be. Is that a problem?" Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No, no problem at all." He moved to throw away the burnt pieces, and I caught sight of an envelope sliding into the trash beneath the charred crumbs. Official looking, with our address typed in that impersonal font businesses use. I started to ask about it, but Julian was already washing his hands, his back to me in clear dismissal. "I have some work to finish up," he said without turning around. "Don't wait up." As he left the kitchen, I noticed the way he paused at the doorway, like he wanted to say something else. But then the moment passed, and I was alone with the lingering smell of burnt bread and the uncomfortable feeling that I'd missed something important. I pulled out my phone and typed quickly. "He's clueless." I could get away with anything. Cassidy's response came back within seconds. "Be careful, Lex. Some things can't be undone." But I was already deleting the conversation, already thinking about tomorrow's lunch and the way David's eyes crinkled when he laughed at my jokes. Julian was upstairs in his home office by now, probably lost in another spreadsheet, completely oblivious to the fact that his loyal wife was planning her next betrayal. I grabbed the envelope from the trash, curious despite myself. It was from a law office downtown, Brennan and Associates. The return address was embossed, expensive looking. Inside, there was nothing but a business card and a handwritten note. Thursday, 3 p.m. Bring the documents we discussed. My heart skipped. Documents? What documents? And why was Julian meeting with lawyers? I heard his footsteps creaking overhead, the familiar sound of his office chair rolling across the hardwood floor. For 8 years, those sounds had been comforting, proof that Julian was there, steady and reliable, taking care of the boring details so I didn't have to. Now they sounded different, calculating, like he was planning something I couldn't see. I shoved the card back into the envelope and tossed it in the trash. Julian was probably just updating our wills or something equally mundane. He was the type to have everything organized, every contingency planned for. It was probably nothing. But as I headed upstairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my predictable, boring husband was keeping secrets of his own. The next afternoon, Cassidy and I sat in our usual corner booth at Meridian Marketing, picking at salads neither of us really wanted. The office buzzed around us with the familiar sounds of productivity, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the distant hum of the copy machine that had been threatening to break down for months. "You look tired," Cassidy said, stabbing a cherry tomato with unnecessary force. "Everything okay at home?" I glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Julian's being weird. Weirder than usual, I mean." "Weird how?" "Secretive. Last night I found this business card from some law office in his trash, and he's been getting these mysterious phone calls that he takes in another room." I paused, watching Cassidy's expression carefully. "I think he might be planning something." Cassidy set down her fork and gave me that look, the one she'd been perfecting since we became friends in college. Part concern, part exasperation, all judgment. "Lexi, please tell me you're not about to say what I think you're about to say." "I'm just saying, if Julian's up to something, maybe I shouldn't feel so guilty about—" "Stop." Cassidy held up her hand, her voice sharp enough to make the intern at the next table look over. She lowered it quickly, leaning closer. "We are not having this conversation here. We are not having this conversation anywhere." But I was already pulling out my phone, scrolling to the message thread I'd been trying not to think about all morning. David's name at the top, followed by a string of texts that would destroy my marriage if Julian ever saw them. "Look, I'm not saying I'm going to do anything crazy, but David asked if I wanted to grab drinks after the Morrison presentation next week, and I'm thinking—" "You're thinking like an idiot." Cassidy's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through me like a blade. "Lexi, you have been married for 8 years. 8 years. To a good man who loves you and pays half your mortgage and remembers your mother's birthday. A good man who ignores me for spreadsheets and falls asleep watching Netflix every night," I shot back. "When's the last time Julian and I had a real conversation? When's the last time he looked at me like I was something more than a roommate who splits the electric bill?" Cassidy was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Around us, the office continued its normal Tuesday routine, blissfully unaware that I was contemplating blowing up my entire life over lunch. "What if he finds out?" she finally asked. "He won't. Julian barely notices when I change my hair, let alone when I'm gone for a few extra hours." I felt a surge of confidence, the same feeling I got when I closed a big client or nailed a presentation. "Besides, it's just drinks. It's not like I'm planning to run away with the guy." But even as I said it, I could feel the lie sitting heavy in my chest. It wasn't just drinks, and we both knew it. It was the way David looked at me during meetings, like I was the most interesting person in the room. It was the way he remembered details about my weekend plans and asked follow-up questions that Julian never bothered with. It was the way he made me feel like the woman I used to be before marriage turned me into someone who got excited about new dish soap. "Lexi." Cassidy reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, her fingers cold against my skin. "I'm saying this because I love you. Don't do this. Whatever you think you're missing, whatever you think Julian isn't giving you, this isn't the way to fix it. I pulled my hand away, suddenly irritated by her concern. Easy for you to say? You're not the one married to someone who treats you like furniture. Julian doesn't treat you like furniture. He treats you like someone he trusts completely. Cassidy's voice cracked slightly, and I realized her hands were shaking. And you're about to prove him wrong. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Meeting, personal, 3 p.m. I'd forgotten about the Morrison client call, the one where David would be presenting his marketing strategy, while I pretended to take notes and definitely didn't think about the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he reached for the whiteboard. I have to go, I said, standing abruptly and gathering my things. Think about what I said, okay? About Julian being secretive. Maybe he's not as trustworthy as you think. Cassidy didn't answer, but I could feel her watching me as I walked away, her disapproval following me like a shadow down the hallway to conference room B. The meeting went exactly as I'd expected. David was brilliant and charming and completely focused on me whenever he spoke. When he suggested drinks afterward, I heard myself saying yes before I could think about Cassidy's warnings or Julian's mysterious lawyer appointments, or the sick feeling in my stomach that felt suspiciously like guilt. Great, David said, his smile lighting up the entire room. I know just the place. As I walked back to my desk afterward, I caught sight of Cassidy through her office window. She was staring at her computer screen, but her fingers were frozen over the keyboard, and there was something in her expression that made me pause. She looked afraid, but I pushed the thought away as I settled back into my chair and opened my email. There was a message from Julian, sent 20 minutes ago. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. J short, efficient, completely lacking in warmth or personality. This was what my marriage had become, logistical updates delivered with all the passion of a weather report. I deleted the message and started planning what I'd wear to drinks with David. Saturday night found us gathered in Mark and Jennifer's backyard for their annual end-of-summer barbecue, the kind of suburban ritual that had once felt like the height of sophistication, and now just reminded me how predictable our lives had become. String lights cast warm shadows across the deck while our friends clustered around the grill, drinks in hand, discussing mortgage rates and school districts like they were the most fascinating topics in the world. Julian stood near the beer cooler, nodding politely while Mark explained his new lawn fertilization system. Even from across the yard, I could see the glazed look in my husband's eyes, the same expression he got when I tried to tell him about my day at work. At least Mark's boring stories came with free beer. Earth to Lexi, Krista said, appearing at my elbow with a wine glass that was definitely not her first. You look like you're plotting someone's murder. Just thinking about how exciting our lives have become, I replied, accepting the glass she offered. Remember when we used to have actual adventures? When we did things that mattered? We're adults now. We have responsibilities. But Krista's voice lacked conviction, and I could see her glancing toward her own husband, who was deep in conversation with Julian about quarterly tax projections. Right. Responsibilities. I took a long sip of wine, feeling the familiar warmth spread through my chest. Tell me something, Krista. When's the last time your husband surprised you? When's the last time he looked at you like you were something more than a business partner? Krista shifted uncomfortably. Marriage isn't about constant surprises, Lex. It's about stability, commitment, showing up for each other even when it's boring. Showing up. I laughed, the sound sharper than I'd intended. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like giving up. Before Krista could respond, Pamela joined our little circle, her face flushed from the heat and whatever she'd been drinking. What are we talking about? You both look way too serious for a barbecue. Lexi's having an existential crisis about marriage, Krista said, shooting me a warning look. Oh, that. Pamela waved her hand dismissively. I go through that every few months. Usually passes after a good weekend away or a new hobby. What if it doesn't pass? I asked, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if you realize that the person you married isn't the person you need anymore? What if you realize you're capable of so much more than what you settled for? The conversation around us seemed to dim, and I realized several people were listening now. Mark had paused mid-sentence about fertilizer spreaders. Jennifer was pretending to arrange cheese and crackers while obviously straining to hear every word. Lexi, Pamela said carefully, what are you really asking? I looked around the circle of faces. Friends I'd known for years, people who'd attended my wedding and celebrated my promotions, and pretended my marriage was something to envy. They all looked so concerned, so worried about saying the wrong thing. It made me want to shake them. I'm asking if any of you have ever wondered what would happen if you just stopped being so loyal, if you stopped putting everyone else's needs first and started thinking about what you actually wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Julian's laugh from across the yard, that polite chuckle he used when he didn't really find something funny. The sound made my skin crawl. Some things are more important than what we want, Krista said finally. Some promises are worth keeping even when they're hard. Easy to say when you're not the one making all the sacrifices, I shot back. Easy to say when your husband actually notices when you're in the room. Julian notices you, Jennifer said quietly. She'd abandoned all pretense of arranging food and was staring at me with something that looked like pity. He talks about you all the time. He's proud of you. He's proud of the idea of me, the wife who keeps his house clean and shows up to barbecues and doesn't cause problems. I drained my wine glass in one long swallow, feeling reckless and powerful and completely justified. But what about the real me? What about the woman who has her own dreams and desires and needs? What are you saying, Lexi? Mark's voice cut through the group, and I realized he'd abandoned his conversation with Julian to listen to mine. Are you saying Julian doesn't meet your needs? I turned to look at my husband, who was now standing alone by the beer cooler, his face carefully blank in the way that meant he was listening to every word. Our eyes met across the yard, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then I thought about David's text from that afternoon, asking if I was still on for drinks Tuesday night, and the feeling passed. I'm saying that loyalty is a two-way street, I said, loud enough for Julian to hear, and some of us have been walking it alone for a very long time. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Someone cleared their throat. Jennifer mumbled something about checking on the potato salad. Krista excused herself to use the bathroom, but not before shooting me a look that clearly said I'd crossed a line. Only Pamela remained, her face a mixture of concern and disappointment. Lex, honey, maybe we should talk about this somewhere private. Why? Because I'm making everyone uncomfortable by telling the truth? I looked around at the scattered group, at the careful way they were all avoiding eye contact. God forbid someone admits that marriage isn't always a fairy tale. No one thinks marriage is a fairy tale, Pamela said gently. But there's a difference between acknowledging problems and whatever this is. I started to respond, but Julian was walking toward us now, his expression unreadable. He moved with the same careful precision he brought to everything else, like he was calculating each step. Ready to head home? He asked when he reached us, his voice perfectly pleasant. It's getting late. I wanted to argue, to point out that it was barely 9 o'clock and we never left parties early, but something in his tone stopped me. Something that suggested this wasn't really a question. Sure, I heard myself say. Let me just grab my purse. As we said our goodbyes, I caught Krista watching us from the kitchen window, her face creased with worry. Mark clapped Julian on the shoulder and said something about calling him next week, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Jennifer hugged me a little too tightly and whispered, "Call me if you need to talk." The drive home was silent except for the sound of Julian's turn signals and the distant hum of traffic. I kept waiting for him to bring up what had happened at the party, to ask what I'd meant about loyalty being a two-way street. But he just drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. It wasn't until we were pulling into our driveway that I noticed the thick manila folder on the back seat, the kind lawyers use for important documents. When I started to ask about it, Julian was already out of the car, walking toward the house with that same measured pace. I followed him inside, questions bubbling up in my throat, but he'd already disappeared into his office. I heard the soft click of the door locking, then the familiar sound of his chair rolling across the floor. Whatever Julian was planning, whatever those documents were for, he wasn't ready to share. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if maybe I should be worried about more than just getting caught. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything feel like a mistake waiting to happen. I sat across from Cassidy at our usual coffee shop, watching her stir sugar into her latte with mechanical precision, while I tried to find the words to explain what had happened at the barbecue. "They all looked at me like I was crazy," I said finally, wrapping my hands around my mug for warmth. Like wanting something more than suburban mediocrity was some kind of mental illness. Cassidy didn't look up from her coffee. "Maybe because you basically announced to all your friends that you're planning to cheat on your husband." "I never said that." "You didn't have to." She finally met my eyes, and I was startled by how tired she looked. "Lexi, I've been thinking about this all weekend, about what you said at lunch, about Julian being secretive. What if you're wrong? What if there's a perfectly innocent explanation for the lawyer thing?" I thought about the manila folder in Julian's car, the locked office door, the way he'd gone silent during the drive home from the party. Then why won't he tell me about it? Because maybe he's planning something nice for you. Maybe he's updating your insurance policies or setting up a trust fund or maybe he's not as clueless as I thought. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and I saw Cassidy flinch. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but you don't know Julian like I do. You don't live with him. You don't see how he checks out every time I try to have a real conversation. So talk to him about it. Tell him how you're feeling. Work on your marriage instead of looking for ways to destroy it." I laughed, the sound bitter in the quiet coffee shop. "Work on my marriage?" "Cassidy, I've been working on my marriage for 8 years. I've tried date nights and couples activities and heart-to-heart conversations that go nowhere because Julian would rather discuss quarterly reports than feelings." "So you're just going to give up? You're going to throw away 8 years because things got boring?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just exploring my options." The lie sat between us like a third person at the table. We both knew I'd already made my decision, had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Tomorrow night I'd be having drinks with David, and we both knew it wouldn't end with drinks. "Lexi." Cassidy reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her fingers surprisingly strong. "I can't be part of this anymore. I can't sit here and listen to you rationalize cheating on your husband like it's some kind of self-improvement project. I'm not asking you to be part of anything. I'm asking you to be my friend. Friends don't help friends destroy their lives." She let go of my hand and leaned back in her chair, putting distance between us that felt like a chasm. "And they don't help them destroy other people's lives either." "Other people? What other people?" "Julian, for starters. Your mutual friends who are going to have to pick sides when this all comes out. Your family. David's family, if he has one." Cassidy's voice was rising, and I noticed other customers starting to stare. "Do you think you're the only person who's going to get hurt here?" "Julian will be fine," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. "He's resilient. He'll move on." "Will he?" "Because from what you've told me, he loves you, really loves you, and you're about to prove that everything he believed about his marriage was a lie. I felt something twist in my chest, sharp and uncomfortable. He doesn't love me. He loves the idea of me. He loves having a wife who doesn't make waves and doesn't ask for too much, and doesn't expect him to actually be present in his own life. You're wrong. Cassidy stood abruptly, gathering her purse and jacket with jerky, angry movements. You're wrong about Julian, and you're wrong about this, and you're wrong if you think I'm going to stick around and watch you implode. Cassidy, wait! But she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown timer. I watched her through the window as she hurried to her car, her shoulders hunched against the rain and something else I couldn't name. I sat alone for a long time after that, staring at my reflection in the coffee shop window and trying to recognize the woman looking back at me. When had I become someone who drove away her oldest friend? When had I become someone who could rationalize betrayal as self-care? My phone buzzed with a text from David. Still on for tomorrow? I found this great place downtown. I stared at the message for a full minute, Cassidy's words echoing in my head. Then I typed back, absolutely, can't wait. As I walked to my car, I tried not to think about the way Julian had looked at me across Mark's backyard, or the locked office door, or the manila folder full of secrets. I tried not to think about Cassidy's face when she'd said, friends don't help friends destroy their lives. Instead, I thought about David's smile and the way he made me feel like someone worth paying attention to. I thought about the restaurant downtown and the possibilities that stretched out beyond tomorrow night, like a road leading somewhere new. It wasn't until I was pulling into my driveway that I noticed Julian's car was already there, even though it was barely noon on a Monday. Through the living room window, I could see him pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing in a way that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. I sat in my car for a moment, watching him through the glass, and for the first time in months, I wondered what my husband was thinking about. What kept him awake at night? What he wanted that he wasn't getting? But then he turned toward the window, and our eyes met, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or hurt, or even disappointment. It was calculation. Julian ended his phone call and disappeared from view, but I could still feel the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Whatever he was planning, whatever those documents were for, I had the sudden, terrible feeling that I was running out of time to figure it out. My phone buzzed again. Another message from David, this one with the address of the restaurant and a note about how much he was looking forward to seeing me. I deleted the message and walked into the house, where Julian was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and an expression I'd never seen before. "How was coffee with Cassidy?" he asked, his voice perfectly pleasant. "Fine," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. "How was work?" "Productive." He took a sip of his coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug. "Very productive." The call came at 2:47 p.m. on Wednesday, just as I was trying to focus on the Morrison account presentation and definitely not thinking about the previous night's drinks with David that had ended in his hotel room. My phone displayed HR internal, and my stomach dropped like a stone. "Lexi, could you come down to my office when you have a moment?" Sandra's voice was professionally neutral, the tone she used when someone was about to get fired. "There's something we need to discuss." I managed to keep my voice steady. "Of course. I'll be right down." The walk to HR felt like a death march. Every colleague I passed seemed to be staring, though that was probably just paranoia. Probably. I smoothed my skirt and checked my reflection in the elevator doors, looking for some sign of guilt written across my face. Sandra's office was sterile and beige, decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and integrity that felt like personal attacks. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, her expression giving nothing away. "I'm going to get straight to the point," she said, folding her hands on the desk between us. "There have been some concerns raised about your conduct with clients, specifically about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries." My mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What concerns?" "The Morrison account. There have been reports of inappropriate interactions with their marketing director." Sandra's eyes never left my face, watching for tells like a poker player. "Would you like to explain your side of things?" "David." Someone had seen us together, or heard something, or maybe David himself had said something. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. "I've maintained completely professional relationships with all our clients," I said, the lie sliding out smooth as silk. "If someone has suggested otherwise, they're mistaken." "So you're saying there's nothing inappropriate about your relationship with David Chen?" The name hit me like a slap. David Chen. I'd been so focused on keeping secrets from Julian that I'd never even asked about David's last name, never thought about whether he might be married, might have his own life to protect or destroy. "Mr. Chen and I have a professional working relationship," I said carefully. "Nothing more." Sandra opened a folder on her desk and pulled out what looked like a restaurant receipt. "This is from Meridian Bar and Grill, Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. 2 drinks, dinner for 2, paid for with the company card you signed out for client entertainment." My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd used the company card without thinking, a stupid mistake that now felt like a neon sign advertising my guilt. That was a business dinner. We were discussing the campaign strategy for next quarter. Until 11 p.m.? At a hotel bar? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sandra knew. Somehow, she knew exactly where we'd gone and what we'd done, and now I was sitting in her office spinning lies that were getting thinner by the second. "I don't appreciate the implication," I said, switching tactics. "I've been with this company for 6 years. My record speaks for itself." "Your record does speak for itself, which is why this is so concerning." Sandra leaned back in her chair, her expression softening slightly. "Lexi, I'm not trying to destroy your career, but there are policies in place for a reason. Relationships with clients can create conflicts of interest, not to mention liability issues." "There is no relationship." "Then you won't mind if we transfer the Morrison account to someone else, just to avoid any appearance of impropriety?" The threat was clear. Agree to the transfer and keep my job, or keep fighting and face whatever consequences she had in mind. The Morrison account was my biggest client, the one that had earned me my last promotion and paid for half my mortgage. "That seems unnecessary," I said. "But if that's what you think is best for the company." Sandra nodded, making notes in my file. "I think it is. And Lexi? I'd strongly recommend keeping your personal life separate from your professional one going forward. These situations have a way of getting complicated very quickly." I walked back to my desk in a daze, Sandra's words echoing in my head. These situations have a way of getting complicated very quickly. As if I didn't already know that. As if I hadn't spent the morning trying to figure out how to face Julian across the breakfast table without giving anything away. My computer was showing 3 missed calls from David and a text that just said, "We need to talk." I deleted the message without responding and tried to focus on the quarterly reports that suddenly felt like the most important thing in the world. But I couldn't concentrate. Every time someone walked past my cubicle, I wondered if they knew. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about me. By 4 p.m., I was ready to crawl out of my skin. I left work early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie, and drove home through rush hour traffic that moved like molasses. All I wanted was to get inside, pour a glass of wine, and figure out how to salvage the mess my life had become. But Julian's car wasn't in the driveway. Instead, there was a note on the kitchen counter in his careful handwriting, "Gone to handle some business. Back late. Don't wait up." The house felt different without him in it, smaller somehow and full of shadows that hadn't been there before. I poured that glass of wine and wandered into Julian's office, drawn by curiosity and the desperate need to understand what my husband was planning. The room was neat as always, everything in its proper place. But there were signs of recent activity, papers stacked on the desk, a USB drive labeled Personal 2024 sitting next to his keyboard, browser tabs open to things like document storage and notary services. I sat down in his chair and stared at the computer screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. Whatever Julian was working on, whatever secrets he was keeping, the answers were right there. All I had to do was click. But before I could move, I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Julian was home earlier than expected, and I was sitting in his office like a thief in the night. I quickly backed away from the computer and hurried upstairs, my heart pounding with guilt and adrenaline. From the bedroom window, I watched Julian get out of his car, moving with that same careful precision, but carrying himself differently, like a man who'd just finished something important. He came upstairs 20 minutes later, his face neutral and pleasant as always. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie with practiced efficiency. "Fine," I said, the same lie I'd been telling for weeks. "Yours?" "Productive." He hung his tie in the closet, each movement deliberate and controlled. "Very productive." That night, I lay awake listening to Julian's steady breathing and thinking about Sandra's warning, about David's missed calls, about the USB drive labeled Personal 2024. Outside, rain tapped against the windows like fingers, drumming impatiently on glass. I had the strangest feeling that time was running out, that whatever game Julian and I had been playing was about to end. But I couldn't shake the suspicion that he was the only one who knew the rules. The certified letter arrived on a Thursday morning in November, delivered by a postal worker who required my signature and seemed to take perverse pleasure in the official nature of his task. Julian had already left for work, or wherever he went these days, and I stood alone in our kitchen, staring at the return address, Brennan and Associates, attorneys at law. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of legal letterhead and a notice that made my blood turn to ice water. Notice of divorce proceedings and petition for legal separation. Please appear at the Downtown Civic Center, Courtroom 3B, Friday, November 15th at 9:01 a.m. The paper fluttered to the floor as I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. Divorce proceedings. Julian was divorcing me. Quiet, passive Julian, who apologized for burnt toast and never raised his voice, had filed for divorce without saying a word. I scrambled to pick up the paper, scanning the legal language for clues about what he knew and how he'd found out. The document was thorough and devastating, citing irreconcilable differences and breach of marital trust in language that was clinical and final. But it was the attachment that made my world collapse entirely. Printed emails between David and me, hotel receipts, credit card statements showing dinners and drinks charged to accounts Julian had access to. Even a photograph of us leaving David's hotel, my face clearly visible as I looked up at him with an expression that left no doubt about our relationship. Julian knew everything, had known for weeks, maybe months, while I'd been congratulating myself on being so clever and discreet. While I'd been pitying him for being boring and oblivious, he'd been building a case against me with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. My phone rang, startling me out of my shock. Cassidy's name appeared on the screen, and I answered without thinking. "Lex? I just heard. Are you okay? You heard?" My voice sounded strange and far away, like it was coming from someone else's throat. "Julian called me this morning. He wanted to make sure someone would check on you after you got the papers." There was a pause, filled with everything Cassidy wasn't saying. "I'm coming over." "He called you?" "He called everyone, Lex. Your mom, our friends from the barbecue, even some people from work. He wanted to make sure you had support during the transition. The transition. As if my marriage ending was a corporate restructuring instead of the complete destruction of everything I'd thought I could count on. Cassidy arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with the spare key she'd had for years. She found me still sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. "Oh, honey," she said, and the sympathy in her voice almost broke me. "I don't understand," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. I understood perfectly. I just couldn't believe Julian had been capable of this level of calculation. He never said anything, never confronted me or asked for an explanation. He just collected evidence. Cassidy sat down across from me, her face carefully neutral. What did you expect him to do? Scream and throw things? Make a scene? I expected him to fight for us, to try to work things out. Did you want to work things out? The question hung between us, and I realized I didn't have an answer. Had I wanted to save my marriage, or had I just wanted to keep it as a safety net while I explored other options? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I wanted. Julian did. He wanted a wife who wouldn't cheat on him, and when it became clear that wasn't you, he made other plans. The judgment in her voice stung, but I deserved it. I'd made my choices, and now I was living with the consequences. "The hearing is tomorrow," I said, looking down at the legal documents. "What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to face him? With honesty, for once? With accountability?" Cassidy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "And with the understanding that you brought this on yourself." The next morning, I stood outside courtroom 3B in my best suit, trying to summon the courage to walk through the doors. The downtown Civic Center buzzed with the usual activity. Lawyers conferring with clients, families dealing with custody disputes, people navigating the legal system's bureaucratic maze. Julian was already inside when I entered, sitting at a table with a lawyer I didn't recognize. He looked calm and professional, like he was attending a business meeting instead of the dissolution of his marriage. When he saw me, he nodded politely, the same greeting he might give a colleague or acquaintance. The proceedings were swift and efficient. Julian's lawyer presented evidence of my affair with clinical precision, the emails, the receipts, the photographs that laid out my betrayal in excruciating detail. I had my own lawyer, hastily hired the day before, but there wasn't much she could do in the face of such overwhelming proof. "Mrs. Morrison," the judge said, looking at me over his reading glasses, "do you contest these allegations?" I looked at Julian, hoping to see some flicker of the man I'd married, some sign that he still cared enough to be hurt by what I'd done. But his expression remained neutral, professional, completely detached. "No, Your Honor," I said quietly. "I don't contest them." The judge nodded and made notes in his file. "Very well. Given the evidence presented and the lack of dispute regarding the material facts, I'm granting the petition for divorce. The marriage between Julian Morrison and Alexis Morrison is hereby dissolved." That was it. 8 years of marriage ended with the bang of a gavel and the scratch of a pen on official documents. Julian shook hands with his lawyer, gathered his papers, and walked toward the exit without looking back. I caught up with him in the hallway, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a desperate countdown. "Julian, wait, please." He stopped but didn't turn around. "What is it, Lexi?" "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe he wasn't going to respond at all. Then he turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt, but something colder and more final. "I know you are," he said, "but sorry doesn't undo 8 years of lies. Sorry doesn't give me back the time I wasted believing in someone who was never really there." "I was there. I loved you." "No," Julian said quietly. You loved the idea of being married. You loved having someone to pay half the bills and show up to barbecues and make you feel respectable while you did whatever you wanted behind closed doors. The words hit me like physical blows, each one more accurate than I wanted to admit. You never fought for us, I said, grasping for some way to shift the blame. You never even tried to work things out. Julian's smile was sad and tired and completely without warmth. I fought for us every day for 8 years, Lexi. Every time I came home to a wife who looked at me like I was an inconvenience. Every time I tried to start a conversation and got one-word answers. Every time I suggested we do something together and you found an excuse to be somewhere else. That's not. I fought for us by staying faithful when you made it clear I bored you. I fought for us by keeping our life together when you were already halfway out the door. And when I finally realized that you'd rather destroy our marriage than work on it, I stopped fighting and started protecting myself. He turned to leave again, but I grabbed his arm, desperate to make him understand. Please, Julian, can't we try again? Can't we go to counseling? Or there is no we anymore, Lexi. There hasn't been for a long time. He gently removed my hand from his arm, his touch careful and impersonal. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I really do. But you won't find it by destroying other people's lives. He walked away then, his footsteps echoing in the marble hallway until they faded into silence. I stood there for a long time, watching the space where he'd been, trying to process the fact that my marriage was over and my husband, my ex-husband, had orchestrated the entire ending without me even realizing it was happening. The law clerk appeared at my elbow with a manila envelope thick with official documents. Mrs. Morrison, these are your copies of the final decree and settlement agreement. You'll want to keep them in a safe place. I took the envelope with numb fingers, feeling the weight of all those papers that would reshape my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. Julian had been thorough, as always. The settlement was fair but firm, dividing our assets with mathematical precision and leaving no room for negotiation or second chances. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright November morning, I tried to remember when I'd stopped seeing Julian as a partner and started seeing him as an obstacle, when I'd stopped appreciating his steadiness and started resenting it, when I'd convinced myself that loyalty was a weakness instead of a strength. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your bed is made, Alexis. Now you have to lie in it. Even my own family had chosen Julian's side, and I couldn't blame them. He'd been the perfect son-in-law for 8 years, while I'd been the wife who took everything for granted and gave nothing back. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, watching people go about their normal Friday morning routines, and tried to figure out what came next. David had stopped returning my calls after HR transferred the Morrison account. Cassidy was speaking to me again, but our friendship would never be the same. Most of our mutual friends had already made it clear where their loyalties lay. Julian had won completely and decisively, not through anger or revenge, but through the simple act of refusing to enable my selfishness any longer. He documented my betrayal with the same careful attention he'd once brought to our anniversary plans and vacation itineraries, and he'd ended our marriage with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. I'd spent months thinking I was getting away with something, that I was smarter and more sophisticated than my boring husband who never noticed anything. But Julian had noticed everything. He'd just been smart enough to let me hang myself with my own rope. As I drove home to the house that would soon belong to someone else, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just a marriage, but a man who'd loved me enough to fight for us in his own quiet way until I made it impossible for him to keep trying. I'd wanted excitement and passion and someone who would make me feel special. Instead, I'd thrown away the one person who'd already thought I was worth 8 years of his life. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to find myself, I'd lost everything that actually mattered. And Julian, quiet and methodical Julian, had made sure I'd face the consequences with the same precision he brought to everything else in his life. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.